They would put poor little women and kids out there while we were shooting, and you have a choice of killing a kid and a wife or being killed yourself because the Japanese were hidden behind it. Oh, they were terrible. And so we had to kill 240,000 people in 3 months to finally take Okinawa. Well, our real problem was Shuri Castle, where we were losing 7,000 to 10,000 Marines a day. At trying to get up this hill with all these caves. Well, by that time we had the Army helping us too, even though the war on the ground in the Pacific was mostly Marines, of who I have the highest regard, and I have very high regard for the Army too. So the Army took this little probing unit, and they took an LST behind the Japanese lines, behind Shuri Castle, and they put these 100 or 120 guys ashore and about 20 trucks, something like that. And they try to see if somehow they could get behind the lines, and if they could, they were going to radio to the Army to send thousands more, because they were just seeing what it was like. Well, they got caught behind enemy lines, and they were retreating under fire. The Japanese were chasing them with mortars and everything else, and the Army was fleeing down this road. And I was not the ones that put them ashore, but 2 days after they were ashore, it was obvious they were all going to die if somebody didn't get them out of there. And my ship was selected to get them out under fire, get these men out, and the day that I was to do it, a typhoon came in. Because Okinawa is the typhoon capital of the world. The major city on Okinawa is Naha. There isn't a house in Naha that's not built of cement and didn't have a 12-foot wall all around it. Now I'm talking typhoons where we talk about these high winds we have. I'm talking 250-mile-an-hour winds. I mean, I'm talking real, that blows everything down. Palm trees snap in half and so on. So the morning they sent me in this little narrow cove to get these guys out in this big cumbersome LST that was huge, but it didn't have as much horsepower as my little wooden 80-foot PT boat had. They had very little power. They could only go 11 knots. PT boats could go 50 knots. And so they were slow and cumbersome. And I was supposed to go in there and rescue them. And that, in my book, is the top, called The Rescue in my book, the top chapter in the book. But my audiences, and I speak all over the country, as you know. I speak in Washington, D.C., and I spoke as a featured speaker at Duke at the Alumni Weekend, and also at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. I speak all up and down the state of California. I gave 113 speeches last year. Giving more this year, sometimes a speech every day. And you're lucky you got me today. I am giving a speech, I think, tomorrow. But anyway, so I took this LST in there, and I finally decided the way to do it. I would go in there and tell them to abandon their trucks, the 100 Army guys. Leave the trucks, leave the equipment. Just all run aboard and had to back out because my LST was going to be blown right onto the rocks if I stayed there any length of time. And you'll have to read the chapter in the book, but to finally get them out, one of my enlisted men, who was the lowest rated guy on the whole ship, literally saved that ship. And his name was Irish too. His name was Kelly. And Kelly saved that ship. It wasn't, and he did that because I couldn't leave the wounded, and the doctor that was trying to help the wounded, and the West Point officer in charge said, "Captain, we're not going to leave our men." And I said, "You got to leave your men. We got to get everybody aboard." And they were in the last 3 trucks that were totally loaded with wounded, and they took me into this truck. And there was a guy lying there with his whole stomach shot open. And they said, "We can't move this man. He has a broken back. I said, put him on a stretcher. They said, if we put him on a stretcher, he's going to die. He's going to break his back. The minute we lift him, you got to get this truck aboard. Well, all the other trucks, 99 trucks, were ahead of him. And they couldn't move the trucks because they were stuck in mud. And so I had to stay there a couple of hours to move the whole thing to get the last truck. So I said, oh, well, then I'm going to have to leave him. And this kid lying with his stomach locked on me looked up and he says, Skip, don't leave me. I don't want to die. And I couldn't believe how a man could talk whose whole stomach was open. And so I had been trained, because I had been helping so many wounded on this LST. You never tell a wounded man you're going to get him to a hospital, because he knows he's going to an Army MASH unit, be patched up and put right back in a line to fight again. You always say just what I told this kid, because what all those wounded are thinking of is home. Maybe a little wife or a baby or something that's clean or something. And I said to this kid, I said, don't worry, kid. I'm going to take you home. And I saw this kid light up right away. Somehow he was going to get out of this mess. And then I walked up the whole line of trucks that were all stuck ahead of me, and I said, what the hell am I doing? How am I going to get these trucks out of here? Well, what we did, we got big chains and stuff, and we started to drag them one at a time. It took about 2 hours. And by the time we got them all aboard the ship in the truck so they didn't have to move, the ship started, as soon as I pulled up my anchor, we started to drift right for the rocks, and we're going to lose the whole ship until my Seaman Second Class Kelly, in one of those little coxswain boats, it's about 1/2 the size of a PT boat, little wooden thing. I told Kelly he had to give his life to smash in the front of my bow and stop my ship from swinging. And he did it. He did it. You know who's looking at that chapter? George Lucas's head photographer, who works for Spielberg, who works for Lucas. They're all looking at that chapter. They're not looking at the Kennedy chapter. They're looking at the Kelly chapter of something that was so horrific. And that kid smashed into that huge steel bow. These were steel. They weren't wooden like these things. He smashed into that, and he was a goner, we thought. And it's a long story, but he actually ended up living, if you read the book called The Rescue. That's a true story. Next question.
Okay, so what was your part in the rescue of the future president, JFK?
Well, to go back to JFK, I was in the same attack with JFK, and I was the radar officer the entire attack. Now that's very important, because I told you all our operations were at night. And therefore at night in total darkness you can't see anything. And add to that the Japanese float planes are over us all night long, constantly drop parachute flares on us. Now, how many of you have been at 4th of July celebrations, at block parties, where when there's a Tonga torch or something going off, pretty soon it blinds you. First the glare blinds your air, and then the smoke blinds your vision. And the Japanese knew this, so they would drop parachute flares after parachute flares in total darkness on us, which would blind us. Then they each carried 3 bombs. And so they had immediately then, once you're all lit up, you drop 3 bombs on you, and you had to try to escape from that. And so we always had those float planes, knew this very narrow passage, called Ferguson Passage, that we had to get into Blackett Strait, which was where the Japanese destroyers were coming down. And the night of August 1st, that Jack Kennedy was rammed, that we got word from the Coast Watchers they were sending down 5 heavy destroyers with almost 1,000 troops aboard to reinforce their airfield. But at that time we had captured Henderson Airfield Base on Guadalcanal. Now we were trying to capture Munda